Welcome to the Minute to Midnight show, folks, and today I hope you are going to enjoy an excellent, what I believe will be an excellent discussion between myself and Doug Woodward and Gary Huffman, who I have Gary and Doug here on the line now. So how's it going, guys? And especially Gary, I'll say hi to you first and then you can say hi to Doug for us.
All right. Hi, Tony and Doug. I'm over here in Montana. It's a nice, beautiful day today, actually, finally. So, Doug, you want to say hi?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. And I'm in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, the center of the cultural universe. And so I'm happy to be a part of the show tonight. And Tony, we appreciate the opportunity to continue to chat with your audience.
Excellent. And what's the weather like where you are, Doug?
It was warm today. It was about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, of course.
Yeah.
And I don't do centigrade too well. So it was nice day. I got out today. I've been recovering from back surgery, so the last 3 months I've been kind of holed up in my bedroom and recovering and all that. So, but I'm beginning to get around more. So happily I got out today, and it was a nice day.
Uh-huh.
You get to read a lot of articles that way anyway, right, Doug?
Yeah, I sure have. I've been busy writing.
Yeah.
And we will actually have a bit of a look at a couple of them, hopefully, as starting points today. And you mentioned the weather. Yeah, well, of course, you guys are heading towards summer, and we are heading towards winter, and it's been getting pretty chilly at nights, but our days are still not too bad at the moment. It's kind of pleasantish. Mm-hmm. But, not too many 80-degree days in the New Zealand spring. That's our summer.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you're closer to the South Pole than we are to the North Pole. That's for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, I was thinking probably a good place to start is, what's happening with the media and so on. And in fact, you actually wrote an article about the corporate media and things recently. And then since I think you've done that article, we've seen this business going down with Julian Assange. So I will be interesting to hear what you both think about what's going on with the media.
Yeah.
Shall we start with you there, Doug?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I wrote an article, and my by the way, my website, for those that are listening and want to follow along, you can go to faithhappens.com. It's faith-happens.com. And the article we're going to kind of talk a little bit about is, could corporate or mainstream media collapse this summer? And really, it begins with the issue of the report that was just recently released by Robert Mueller, the special counsel that was investigating whether or not Trump and the Trump campaign had colluded with the Russians. And so the report came out and essentially said that there was no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. And there was, although the Republicans and Trump want to claim that the report fully exonerated Trump, it didn't really do that. Basically, it was kind of ambivalent on that subject, that, a lot of what Trump did is not obstruction of justice, but it's just presidential prerogative. And so he doesn't have to necessarily do everything in accordance to the whims and the wishes of Congress or the special counsel or whatever. So anyway, so that came out, and that's been sort of digested, and you've got a lot of the sort of alternative news people sort of cheering because they believe that Donald Trump should never have been put under this kind of a microscope to begin with. And then you've got the people like at Fox News, like Sean Hannity, that, is one of the sort of go-to sources. The Fox News in the evening has three different opinion or op-ed people. Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and Laura Ingraham. And the three of those, of course, are very pro-Trump and believe that, this whole witch hunt was a witch hunt. And so, of course, the rest of the media is the kind of what the main point of the article is, that the media really has a black eye and a bloody nose because they have been following this and promoting that there is collusion, and that they've sort of become the judge and the jury, and had already decided that Trump was guilty of all this. And Mueller, who spent $35 million in 22 months, came back and said, sorry, there's really no evidence that in fact occurred. So it was kind of a great reversal. Wasn't necessarily expected to go down that way, but it did. And so there's sort of I'd say a spirit of optimism right now amongst the alternate media, the folks that do news on YouTube and their websites, that we may in fact see some justice being done, that the investigations may flip and now begin to turn to parties like Hillary Clinton and other parties that may be guilty of certain things.
My personal thoughts on that is, unless you believe that the Rothschild family, Evelyn and his wife, are going to go down as well, then I seriously doubt the Clintons are. You look, those are close friends, and the Rothschild is one of the most powerful men in the world, whether people like it or not. Is he going to let his friends go down the tubes? No, I don't think so. I seriously doubt it.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Tony. I think that there is such a wall built around the Clintons that they probably are guilty of some of the most heinous crimes, child trafficking and stealing the resources of other countries and, just enriching themselves through the Clinton Foundation. They're probably guilty of heinous crimes, and they probably won't be brought to justice just because they have such a wall of protection surrounding them.
Well, and there's so many people who have been suicided in the past that I think most journalists are afraid that might be the future for them,
What do they call it? Arkansas.
I was going to say it's called Arkansas, because they're from Arkansas, and the list of people that supposedly the Clintons have offed is like about 97 people or something like that. So the list continues to grow.
And then you've got you've got the Podestas and so on as well,
right?
Which are all tied into this. And of course, we had John Podesta in New Zealand right before our shooting here in Christchurch, which is really a big coincidence. Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. So, well, and one of the things is I do think you're right. I do think there will be some sacrificial lambs. I think it's going to be FBI people, and it may even reach into the Department of Justice, to Loretta Lynch, the former, kind of AG, 2 AGs ago. There was today's new one is Bill Barr, and before that was Jeff Sessions, and before that, really, I guess, if I'm getting this right, was Loretta Lynch. So, I think Andrew McCabe, the former acting director and kind of second in command of the FBI, he's going to be found guilty. James Comey is probably going to be found guilty, and he was the head of the FBI before Trump fired him. And then certainly I think the two lovebirds, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, they're both probably going to do some time. So you probably have a number of people in the Department of Justice, the FBI, that are going to go down. There's probably going to be a lot of other people. I know that Devin Nunes, who's the former head of the committee that did investigation on this whole issue, that they just turned in, I think this past week or this week, criminal referrals to the AG based upon the research and investigation that they did prior to the time in which the Democrats re-won the House of Representatives. So that's happening. So you've got criminal referrals coming from the Republicans in the House or in the Congress. So all this stuff is still, there's still a lot of speculation about where it's going to go, what it's going to mean, but it certainly looks like that we're going to be. I think there's a guy named Joe DeGeneva who is a former attorney, U.S. attorney in Washington D.C., and as he said, the next 2 years are going to really be focused on the trials, literal trials of many of these people that are going to be convicted of their part in actual sedition, treasonous acts, trying to perform a coup to unseat a duly elected president. So it's going to be interesting, but all that distraction, I think, is going to, as you're saying, Tony, I think it's going to help provide even more protection for the Clintons, because it's just it's taking all the focus of the news away from them and onto the people in the supposedly the law, the major law agency of the government, the FBI. It's going to go after them, and probably not some of the politicians that ought to be held accountable.
What are your thoughts on it, Gary?
I was thinking fake news originally was what happened. It was the news that actually helped Trump get in, and then that was labeled fake news. And fake news switches back and forth all the time.
Well, yeah, you had the stuff that James Comey did right before the election, where he came out and basically reopened the Hillary Clinton email scandal, and then about 3 days later said, "Oh no, we're not going to, we're not going to investigate it after all." But he raised so much doubt that he was probably influential. That little exercise that he did in in causing Trump to win, that combined with the Julian Assange WikiLeaks information that came out about John Podesta and others, that all was the sort of the October surprise in this this past presidential election.
So it seems like these things just keep going back and forth, and I always look at the conspiratorial side of things, I guess. And so in the Hegelian dialectic, I think it's just, it kind of switches from one side to the other, and it's all ultimately to bring about, the agenda that the deep state, deep state and higher, are looking to have come about.
Yeah, so the globalism.
I'd like to look positively and think, all these bad guys are going to go down, but I kind of have my doubts that it, like you say, Doug, sacrificial lambs, maybe a few of them, but real criminals are still going to be operating, I believe.
Yeah.
So we had this business with Julian Assange being arrested in London, and he'll be extradited and all that, which, I mean, I have mixed feelings about Julian Assange. Do I trust him? No. Did he bring out some useful information? Yes. But what's the end goal here, I mean, he was partly responsible, I'm sure, for getting Donald Trump elected, and yet the Trump administration's now gone after Julian Assange. And I mentioned the de Rothschilds link to the Clintons, and of course that was one of the things that showed up really clearly in the Clinton's email saga, because there were several, back and forth emails between Lynn de Rothschild and Hillary Clinton and so on. So what are both your thoughts on this whole business with Assange, from somebody, people that are in America, obviously, on way down the other end of the world. So,
right. Well, I think there's sort of two sides to it. One of the sides that's more sort of the traditional Republican viewpoint would be, gee, this guy harmed national security by publicizing the leaks from actually, curiously, a person from Oklahoma, Bradley Manning, who was formerly Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning. He's from a little town about 30 miles from where I'm sitting. And so he was the one who leaked, many megabytes of information originally, and this is what Julian Assange had been sitting on, and sort of slowly letting out a barrage, but not all at once, kind of well timed at certain points. And so he was influential in the election because he had the goods on the Clintons and the Podestas and so forth, and the whole issue of Pedogate and potentially John Podesta's involvement in Pedogate, and then also sort of became Pizzagate, with this one little comic pizza place in Washington, D.C. that supposedly was sort of a center for pedophile activity amongst the power players in Washington. So anyway, so Assange just sort of rolled up into that. But the other side, so the one side is this conservative, he harmed national security. The other side, which is the side that a lot of the alternate media, the sort of pro-Trump people, are taking, is that Assange is a journalist, and that as a journalist, it's not illegal for him to publish those emails and any of that information that he wishes to, because it's in the public interest. And the court case was from several decades ago on the so-called Pentagon Papers, which a guy named Daniel Ellsberg was involved. And the Pentagon Papers essentially showed that the government, the United States government, was nefarious in its activities associated with the lead up to and the reason for the Vietnam War. And so that test case really is established law. And so in theory, the only thing that the government, U.S. government, can try to prove that could get Assange is that he was instrumental in breaking the password that Chelsea Manning used to be able to get to the data and get the data basically out and to WikiLeaks. And if he is not able to be connected, and by the way, the government probably has a very weak case in this respect. If he cannot be connected to that, then he will probably be exonerated. He probably will not serve any jail time, and so that's sort of the side of the kind of the popular folks. And I kind of believe Donald Trump because I think he's a populist. If enough people make it clear that they want Julian Assange not to be, incarcerated and convicted, that Trump will switch and become an advocate for Assange not to do jail time. So, and then the last thought is this optimistic, hoped for thing, that the reason that Trump wants Assange extricated and brought back to the U.S. is that there's a lot of information he has, and he wants the dirt on a lot of these people, and Assange is still sitting on top of that. So that's kind of the assessment. A lot of it now really gets into freedom of the press, and we can kind of talk about that next. But that's kind of the overview of the Assange thing and where it fits in historically.
Just before I go to you, Gary, you may have seen it too, that Donald Trump basically said, WikiLeaks is not his thing, and he didn't really know much about them. And you look back to his, speeches back in the 2016, and he was all over WikiLeaks and,
Absolutely.
Praising them. And then to me, it's just like, I know a lot of people aren't going to like it, but it's just like Donald Trump lies when it suits him. There was another one not too long ago where he lied about his father being born in Germany, which was not true as well.
Which was not true.
I mean, his father was of German ancestry, but it just, I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if Pinocchio's in the White House. But, anyway, I don't want to turn this into an either pro or anti-Trump sort of thing, but just on that side of things, it irks me that he seems to be able to lie and Christians do backflips over excusing it. So, Gary, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I guess, speaking of what you just mentioned, by the way, I showed that video to my little men's group last night, just as part of our looking at what's happening in the world, because that was a good one. You have to wonder, I mean, is he just a liar and he just can't help himself? Or is there a reason why he is now, I don't know anything about WikiLeaks when he was all over it at one time. I have to think there's some reason that he's taking that stand right now. And, one thing you didn't mention, Doug, it's a possibility. Maybe there's something in WikiLeaks that Julian Assange has that Donald Trump doesn't want out.
Yeah.
That's very possible. Yeah.
That's another possibility. There was somebody pointed me to this, and I've known that, Scott Adams, who writes the Dilbert comics, he is, number one, the Dilbert comics are great. But he is kind of a political commentator, and he does some pretty good stuff. He used to blog more, and now I guess he's just doing these periscopes, which is annoying to me because I'd rather not just wait and watch those things. But he did one on this as soon as this thing happened with Assange. He did one on that, and it was very interesting. I haven't seen anybody else mention it, and then you guys can comment on this, but he was basically saying, the press isn't saying anything. The press wasn't saying anything for a while, and it's like they were waiting for something, waiting for their marching orders. Which side are we supposed to come down on? Because nobody was coming down on a side. Are we against this or are we for this? Yeah. And he was making a very good point. He went into it a lot more, and it was very good, which I can't remember. But I'm just wondering if that does seem to be the case. I'm not sure if everybody's come down on a side now. By now, they probably have.
Well, yeah, it's, and he's, again, I think the populist thing, I think he's driven, to the extent that he's driven by the, I'd say sort of the community that we're a part of, that we agree with, more of a libertarian kind of approach. To the extent that he is influenced by that and reflects that, then, he reinforces his popularity with, the folks that support Trump. And to the extent that he voices some of the, the things that sound like deep state or even traditional sort of the neoconservative neocon point of view, then there's a lot of less enthusiastic, interest in that. So, one of the major things that's going on in the media right now is when you look at the which I do, I try to look at because I've been doing a lot of YouTube, being stuck back here, recovering from surgery. Yeah. But you look at YouTube and I look at both sides, and so listen to a lot of the liberal stuff, and what you find is that some of the true classical liberals are as much angry with the Democratic Party and with the journalism and the media as are the people that would be more right-leaning. So what you're seeing is the people kind of more on the far right, more on the far left, are in agreement that the media is fake news, that the media is controlled by the corporate America, whether it's the pharmaceuticals or the oil companies or whatever. It's the largest corporations are working, hand in hand predominantly with the Democrats and with the media. And the media focuses and tells the stories that those guys with the big checkbooks, buying sponsorships on MSNBC and so forth, that's the way the media goes. And so it's basically 95% of the media is focused on stories that are pro deep state and anti-Trump. And Assange is kind of playing into this because 7 or 8 years ago, the journalists, at an MSNBC like a Rachel Maddow or an Anderson Cooper at CNN, they would have been supportive of Assange because they would have recognized that he was a journalist, kind of in the same spirit as what Daniel Ellsberg did with the Pentagon Papers. They would say that he's a good guy. And, now, fast forward, 7 years later after he's, been in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years, and they're basically saying, well, what he did was really harmful to the national security state, essentially. So they flipped. And again, it's because they really are supporting the deep state, and they do not want the information to come out about the nefarious activities of the government. And so that's kind of where we are, and it's going to be getting into the real center of the storm is going to be around the issue of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and whether or not this is kind of the point of the article that I wrote is the traditional media on the verge of collapsing because most people now, thanks to the internet, are wise to what's really been going on. For the last, we know it's been going on since the 1960s, 1970s with Project Mockingbird, but, most people don't know that, but what they do know is that they can't trust what the media says. And, so that's what's going on.
The other side of that is the alternative media is being clamped down on more and more as well. We're being censored more and more. You got the mainstream thing. Well, Gary, I'll be interested in your thoughts. Is there some Hegelian dialectic going on here with both sides in sort of disarray in a sense? Could there be a move to centralize media? Donald Trump's called the mainstream media fake news. He was sort of backing up the alternative media, but when it's really come to it, he hasn't stood beside the alternative media either. Is there a move? I mean, like communist China or ex-communist Russia, where the state controlled the media. I mean, is that what we could be heading for, but except a world government kind of state controlling the media? That's just my sort of thinking along these lines. I'd be interested in your thoughts, Gary.
Looking from that point of view, Hegelian dialectic, I think very well could be what's going on. I don't know if have you ever watched any videos from TruthStream Media?
I haven't.
They do a very good job. They're very good researchers, and they present all the documents and everything with whatever they're talking about. But anyway, they talked about the clampdown on information just recently in one of their latest videos. In fact, I showed it last night to my old men's group. It was it was and the thing is, there's a video where Obama was saying, we really need to control the flow of information, and we need to clamp down on some of this stuff, And there's a video of President Trump. Well, I don't know if it was after he was president or before he was president, but saying the same thing, essentially. And I think he really does feel that way. And I think that he could move to do something like that to make sure information. Basically, in their video, what they showed is, Google is trying to make it so that you only get the right answer. You only get one answer when you Google something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't get any of the alternative stuff. If it's even there, it will be many pages back. Yep. And so what they really want is the official story to be the answer, and that's all you get.
Yeah, it's very, very Orwellian.
Yeah, and so that's what if Trump is allowing that to happen and really not saying anything, then maybe that's where he wants to go to.
Well, you look at the situation with New Zealand, and we had the Christchurch shooting, and the alleged shooter, the nutcase job, but probably I wouldn't be surprised if an MK Ultra nutcase job put a manifesto out and did a live stream video. And of course, it wasn't out long, and then bam, they're banned. Like in New Zealand, you can get big prison terms for even still having copies of them. And
you can't have it on your computer even, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's sort of like, again, it's controlling the information. And then they've clamped down in Australia. I think the Australian government come down big time on Facebook over it. And basically, big lawsuits potentially against Facebook and whatnot, and get rid of live streaming like that. So in a sense, again, it's moving things in the control direction. They can have an event like that. So, see, we can't have this happen, folks. We can't have a video like that going out live. So we've got to stop that. And then, and all what I see is one by one, these are all steps to bring us into more censorship and more control, and ultimately, potentially, when you get a new world order or whatever you're going to call it, then they control the whole narrative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's right. A few years ago, we were saying how the internet was perhaps the greatest catalyst for democracy that has ever been. And that's true, because we have access to more information now than we ever have, because we have a lot more choices for where we get news and get real news. But to your point, Tony, that's what's happening, is that the government is wanting Facebook and Google and others to clamp down on, in effect, the free speech that we've got. At least we have for the most part on the internet, and their censorship. I have the same thing. I have to be, careful what I write and what I promote on Facebook. So it tends to force me more into, talking more about theology and less about geopolitics. And because if I'm talking about spiritual things, I'm safe. But if I start talking about things that the government's doing, like an MK Ultra or CIA, the fact that they foment revolutions and in many countries, including like Venezuela right now, that that stuff is that's really tugging on Superman's cape, and they don't want me to say anything that could harm the deep state.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And unless, of course, it's somebody like Israel Folau, an Australian rugby player, which made a quoted a scripture, about fornicators and people that steal and adulterate, and homosexuals and all that going to hell. And, of course, that's created a massive furore in the rugby world in New Zealand and England and Australia. And, so then it's jumped on to the whole, basically, again, it's like censor somebody's points of view because they don't fit the line that is being pushed.
Yeah. That's right. They don't fit the narrative.
There's another one that's really being clamped down on, and that is anything to do with vaccines.
Yes.
Even on Facebook, just to your friends, your local friends, you cannot say anything about there might be a problem with some vaccines, or they just jump all over you, So, so the YouTube and Facebook, Google, they're all moving to clamp down on anything to do with vaccines, and so you only get the official story, which is vaccines are great and everybody should have them. And I just had a thought, this may be just a crazy tinfoil hat thought, but maybe they allowed all of this information to be out there and all this crazy YouTube stuff, conspiracy theories and everything out there that we like to watch, so that they can gather all this information about us, and then use that in the equivalent of the Chinese social credit score, because now they have all the information of what you watch and what you like, and
without a doubt,
social credit score is coming, I'm sure, to the United States.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah. So the issue then, where this is, I think that Julian Assange is going to be kind of the catalyst, the spark plug or whatever to really bring this whole discussion about freedom of the press, free speech, and really to the forefront. And, and so you have, these forces that are causing the corporate media to continue to go down in terms of its ratings and loss of revenue, because more and more people are moving away from television and newspaper news and moving to things on the internet, people that they believe in the internet. And so that's really what's happening. So you've got the issue of revenue and money and power. The media has been, of course, at the center of controlling public opinion. Back to Walter Lippmann's book from the 1930s, The Power of Public Opinion. It's always been the intention of governments to shape the opinion of the people based upon the media. And so to the extent that the media becomes irrelevant, it means the government cannot control things. And so so we're really at, how a civil war would take place, I can't imagine. But it is a point where the libertarians versus the deep state, status quo that the Republicans and the Democrats now represent in the U.S. represent the status quo. And I assume you have sort of the same thing with, was it Labour and the Tories in England? And I'm not sure how the two-party system works in Australia and New Zealand, but, you've got sort of all the guys that are representing the status quo. They want to continue power. They want media to be there to reinforce the narrative. And they don't want other people questioning their power. And of course, that's what's happening with alternative media, on whether it's YouTube or Facebook. And again, Tony, like you're saying, it's subject to increasing levels of scrutiny and censorship.
Yeah.
Well, we had the case in New Zealand where last year Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern were due to speak in New Zealand, and that got so, all of the radicals and whatnot got out there and started protesting, and then they got the venue shut down, and our Prime Minister, who's, well, let's be frank, she's got a Freemasonry background. She was, I think an Eastern Star. I can't guarantee that.
Oh, yeah.
But she definitely got a Freemason scholarship to get her through university. So she's beholden to them. She came out and said, well, New Zealand has spoken. We don't want this right-wing extremist theology in New Zealand and all that. Well, Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern were hardly really extreme right-wingers. They just bring out some truth that they didn't want to hear. Yeah. So that we've got this going on in all directions. Again, it's basically ostracizing anyone that has a different opinion than the government and whatnot.
Right.
The other thing, I sort of want to shift into from here is another article that you wrote, which I find really interesting, on bankers and bailouts, because money is another way that they will control the populace, and everyone is in such debt. And last time in 2008, it was the government that bailed out the banks and so on. Well, next crisis, the governments are not going to be able to bail out the banks. The Federal Reserve's not. I believe there's going to be bail-ins. And every Western country has in law now that you're an unsecured creditor in the event of a financial crisis, and then the first thing to happen is a Cyprus-type event where they will give everybody's bank accounts a haircut and bail in the banks. And then if they still continue to fail, eventually they want a whole new system. But, again, it's I think another way that they're going to control people.
No question. Our pocketbooks, that's really the mark of the beast, isn't it? It's all about being able to buy and sell. And what most people don't realize is that when you deposit money into a bank account, you basically are relinquishing that money to the bank. So you no longer technically own that money. The bank owns it, and they're just doing you a favor by letting you write checks on that account. And so, in effect, the money's theirs. And the Cyprus thing, one thing we could be a little bit cautious about is that it may not be a fair test for what happens in the rest of the world, because the Cyprus banks were specifically there to launder drug money. And so a lot of the reason why they could justify the bail-ins was that they were laundering money, zillions of dollars, basically. And so that's a unique factor. That's what Cyprus decided to do, and it built their economy, but it also caused the Russians and other drug cartels to use them as a means of cleaning their money. So, but back to the the situation in the U.S. and I've always been of the opinion that the Final Babylon, which I wrote a book with two other guys called The Final Babylon, that the City of London and Wall Street are the two most powerful entities in the world, and it's because they finance everything. And the government, basically, the government of the United States, in some extent, exists for the purpose of being able to funnel money from taxes into the Federal Reserve, into the central bank, so that the central bank really has all the control over all aspects of financial issues that are going on. And so I'll pause there, but we can dig more into some of those issues if you'd like, Tony.
Yeah, Gary, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I just remember that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but Hillary Clinton said when this thing was happening in Greece, she said, "Oh yeah, we could do that here if we need to," right?
Yeah,
remember
that's
that
right.
one?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, that's true. Well, of course, Hillary's of the opinion that she should have two positions: one that she tells the public, and the other one that she tells Wall Street.
Yeah.
And so that sort of tells the whole story right there. So,
what you mentioned before, Doug, about basically what I said. Once your money's in the bank, you're an unsecured creditor. The bank owns it; you don't.
Right.
I would say a lot of our listeners probably aren't even aware of that fact. They think once the money's in the bank, it's still theirs, but technically that's not the case, is it?
That's correct. It's not theirs. and the government's or the bank's just providing a service for you so that you can write checks and disperse the money more easily to your creditors, basically.
And you're just lucky if you get it back, right?
Right. Yeah. The other thing that I find important for people to understand, and I teach this because I teach finance and entrepreneurship in a university here in Oklahoma, and but I talk to people a little bit to the extent I feel like I can about the fractional banking system and the reality that banks are chartered to create money. And the deposits that the bank gets is not really the limiting factor in terms of what they can loan. The amount that they can loan is based upon ratios established by law that basically says however much capital the bank has, they can loan out 7 times, 10 times, 15 times, 30 times that amount of capital. The capital really comes in two forms. Comes into investors that invest in the bank stock, and then the other thing it comes in the form of deposits. And so the liquidity crisis that occurred in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 was the fact that the banks were going well beyond these ratios in terms of the amount of loans that they were giving out. That was one of the issues, and so there was the need to establish more capital, and so that's really what banks had to do. They had to get more investors to put more capital in. But again, the fractional banking system essentially says that when you go to the bank and you want to get a loan for a car, the bank doesn't go to their deposits and take money from their deposits and hand it to you. That's kind of the way that we think of the way the bank works. It's kind of like when someone borrows some money from us, we have to write them a check and so our money goes to them. But that's not the way it works at a bank. At a bank, when you go in to ask for a loan, they just decide, okay, you want a loan for $25,000 to buy this really nice Nissan automobile. So we're just going to invent $25,000. And we're just going to put numbers into your bank account that says all of a sudden magically you have $25,000. So it's not the case that banks work based upon the amount of deposits they get, that it has a direct correlation, because it doesn't, because of this thing called the fractional banking system, the fact that banks create money. So these are fundamental misunderstandings that people have about the way the banking system works.
Gary.
Well, I want to ask Doug, maybe you can explain this to me. I was reading
I'll try.
Article on, it's on the Alt Market website, but I don't think it's Brandon Smith. It was actually written by the Birch Gold Group, I guess. Anyway, they're talking about how the Federal Reserve is not doing quantitative easing, but they're doing quantitative tightening. They're actually sucking up billions of dollars. So there's less and less money is available, and they haven't stopped that. They're still doing that pretty fast, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I have a theory as to how it works. Essentially, quantitative easing was the buyback of bad debt that the banks had on their books from the mortgage debacle, because they were essentially buying different types of derivative securities that were mortgage-backed securities. And there's a movie called The Big Short that I recommend everybody watch, that really explains, what was going on. And because this was a true story, this one guy figured out that all of these banks and Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs and all that were essentially building derivatives based upon mortgage loans to people that couldn't pay their loan. And so it was built on a house of cards. And so this whole thing, what the government did, the Federal Reserve came in and they bought the troubled assets, the TARP program, Troubled Asset Relief Program. And so they basically moved off the balance sheet from the banks all these bad debts. They pulled those away from the bank and they put them onto the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve began to carry all these bad debts. And so it frees up the bank then to be able to have more money to once again loan and and as well as they did the other thing was that they opened up what's called the discount window, and they allowed not just commercial banks, but they allowed investment banks like Lehman Brothers to have access to government money that was essentially created by the Federal Reserve. And so that was, that was another part of the program. So quantitative easing, actually, there's, I talk about that in the article, that the amount that they talk about that the government through the Treasury, through the Federal Reserve loaned was like $700 billion. The reality was that it was closer to 16 trillion, and that 4 trillion has gone into the system, but there's still 12 trillion that hasn't been quantitatively eased yet, that hasn't really been taken off of the federal balance sheet. And until it does, there's going to be continued sort of a dampening upon the economy, and so it's kind of like there's no free lunch. The government took all the bad debt, but essentially it still harms the economic system of the world that this happened. So So anyway, I'll probably get you more into the accounting and finance than people want to know, but essentially, no, quantitative easing is an ongoing reality that will continue on, sort of behind the scenes on the back burner, if you will, for years.
Now, what about, I mentioned to you before we were talking about the whole gold and silver situation, and, I believe that's the true money. That's the money that God created, was gold and silver, not what we've got here with these fiat currencies. And, of course, they're manipulated into the ground by the big players. I believe JP Morgan, has been massively sweeping up physical silver into somewhere. And a lot of the big central banks are accumulating gold rapidly, like Russia and China and a number of others.
Right.
They're stockpiling gold. But the prices that we see it are not really moving, or they go up a bit and then they get whacked down, and they're like being kept in this window through manipulation, I believe. But, the banks like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and whatnot, they've been found out for manipulating this before, and they basically they get a slap on the wrist with a wet bus ticket and a fine that, to them is nothing. I mean, they could just print that money anyway.
It's just a cost of doing business. It's no big deal. So, I think that in terms of the precious metals and commodities and all that there is true value in commodities, whether you're talking about oranges and corn or you're talking about gold and silver. It has some intrinsic value. And fiat money, of course, it's just numbers. It's just vapor. But it's the way that the world works, and it's the way the central banks have taken control of the world. So in addition, to kind of get back to the main theme, in addition to the media being a control mechanism, there's hardly anybody that says the bankers are the good guys. It's the world's problems are the bankers and the lawyers, basically. As Shakespeare said, first kill all the lawyers. So I forget which play it was that he said that, but he knew something, and so that's kind of where we are. Is we've got banks that are continuing to do what they've done. There's more controls, more regulations now than there were, but essentially banks that were too big to fail are just bigger than before, and the next time that they overextend themselves, there may not be any relief that is going to keep the world from going into chaos, financially speaking.
Yeah. And I think that's probably planned.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I think we all think that day of reckoning is kind of coming. And there's even talk that, that the governments are trying to, potentially go back to some type of a gold-based currency, as part of the solution. But whether they do that or they end up doing Bitcoin and that becomes the mark of the beast, it's not clear. It's just obvious, though, that the financial hegemony of these major banks around the world, that they're calling the shots. And so, essentially the Illuminati, the elites have us covered from, about 6 different ways to Sunday.
My personal feeling is that when we do get the mark of the beast and a whole new system, that they will probably base it on giving everything a value. Like, say, for argument's sake, gold might be worth 1,000, whatever it is, and silver a certain amount, and then your horse is worth a certain amount, and you're worth a certain amount, and your Earth's resources are, and so they'll value everything, including people, as with a value, and that's how they'll build the system. I think that to me makes the sense of how they'll do it. But Gary, what are your thoughts?
I think that's right. I think you're right.
Yeah, and of course that brings us back to our subject of a couple different times on AC chain, and they may not be the final one, but I think they are definitely a prototype, at least, for the world money system, because, well, number one, the IMF, they've already come out and said, we're going to be going to a cryptocurrency eventually. I mean, they basically said that, didn't they, Tony?
Yes.
Christine Lagarde.
Yeah.
And then, so AC Chain, they say that they're an SDR, and they're a cryptocurrency, and they say that they are digitizing all assets. And they've started, they started with tea, and they've done corn. They're doing different commodities, and they've started with some things in the United States. Even they have their own. They bought up some land down in Texas, and they're digitizing everything in that land, and all of the developments in that piece of land. Anyway, so they're testing all this, but their idea is to digitize exactly what Tony said. Digitize every asset, including you, because you are one of their assets.
That's right. We're owned by the state. We serve the state.
So
for us.
That's obvious. I mean, so digitizing gold, if China owns a bunch of gold, and then if you own some gold, then all of that will be digitized. It'll all be on the blockchain. And so Bitcoin's really worth nothing right now, but AC Chain says they're taking Bitcoin and Ethereum, putting them together, and then whatever other cryptocurrencies, and then they will all be backed by all these digitized assets. So it won't be worthless anymore. It'll be, the digital money will be worth all of these assets.
Yeah.
They'll have a backing. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's just a matter of how they're going to get us, how they transition us into that system. And I think that, once they have a certain amount of it ready to go, there will be chaos. They will let the bubbles burst. The everything bubbles, as I think Brandon Smith calls them, and then there'll be ensuing masses of chaos. That's the only way they're going to be able to transition us into another system.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
No, I think that's right.
We'll all be ready to sign up just to eat.
Yeah, I know it. So that's why those of us that believe in a pre-trib rapture are excited about the pre-trib rapture.
Yeah, I'm not on that band, myself. I haven't totally discounted it, but I'm certainly not putting my eggs in that basket.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be raptured and resurrected. It's just a question of when.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's where we stand. So anyway, so the between the banking and the media, there's major fights ahead. And, I think a lot of what we've got to do as individuals is participate in supporting the sort of the free press. And it's a little bit like, in times past where there were sort of these opinion newspapers that were out there that were speaking against the government, and the government was trying to stamp them out, and jail any journalist that was raising Cain, with that particular government. And that's been historically true for the last, 600 years since the printing press was invented. Now we have this more powerful tool called the internet, and the internet is the printing press of our day. And the question is just, will we be free to use it?
Yeah. So, well, there's that level of things, and then there's the spiritual level of things as we're getting on towards an hour here.
Yes.
And we'll have to look to wrap up fairly soon, I guess. But, we've got to, I guess, have our spiritual houses in order first, and that's a thing that faces all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the prep that real prep that we need to do for the coming chaos is a spiritual preparation.
Yeah. That's what we need to be able to face it.
Yeah, well, that's right. And so, that's kind of Gary and I wrote a book called The Revealing, which really deals with those kinds of issues and getting ourselves ready, recognizing the importance of community, the importance of really understanding what kind of life is in store for us. And sort of our book that we wrote together, I think, was sort of a spiritual prep guide to that. So we want to encourage people to take a look at that.
Yeah, so you may as well tell our listeners where they can find that book again, and your websites, both of them, so they can, because we've looked at a couple of your articles sort of in a roundabout way too, Doug, and
sure,
then you've got this book, so maybe, give the listeners a heads up onto where they find you guys. Right.
Yeah. Well, Gary, you go first and talk about the website, and if you want to talk about the book, that's great.
Yeah. So we have a website for the book, and it is the-revealing.com. It has some chapters of the book on there in a little bit shortened form. The book really is, like Doug was saying, it's for the most part, I would say it's preparation, but it's also something. It helps you understand what you have to look forward to, what the the precious hope, the glorious hope that we have, which I do not believe has to be a pre-trib rapture. It is the glory of God in the church, And so whenever that happens, that's what we have to look forward to. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. And then in terms of my website and the book itself, you can obtain it, by going to Amazon, either an ebook on Kindle or a printed copy. It's also available on iBook, on Apple and Lulu and others. So you could find that there. And then my website is, as I said, faith-happens.com. You can also find me by my marketing moniker, which is Doomsday Doug. Just type in Doomsday Doug and it'll take you to my website as well. But I'm busy. We've worked on that book, and then I've also got a new book called Rebooting the Bible, which deals a lot with the issue of the Septuagint, the Greek Bible that really was the Bible of the early church for about 400, 500 years before the Latin Vulgate came into play with the Roman Church. But the Septuagint always has been the Bible of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And so the book's really talking about the Septuagint and how it identifies certain things that the traditional Bible, the Masoretic text, the Bible that we have in the King James and American Standard and all these other different versions, it talks about some of the things that were corrupted by rabbis that did not like Jesus at the end of the first century, and points out that the way that the Masoretic text was corrupted, and looks at the Septuagint, which is what the New Testament quoted. And so that book, again, is called Rebooting the Bible, and you can find that book on my website or on Amazon.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I told you the time would go fast, and we're up to the hour, and it has gone super fast. But it's been a great discussion, so we will definitely have to, get back together again in a few weeks' time, because we'll never run out of things to talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
For sure.
Absolutely. And we appreciate the opportunity, Tony.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it.
And thank you, guys both as well. Folks, don't forget to like this video if you're watching it on YouTube, and share it. And you can also find audio-only versions of it on iTunes, and both audio and video on our website, aminutemidnight.com. And on our website, you can also donate to us if you want to help us to keep this running, because we do only do this through donations. Can't keep it going without your help. So you can donate at aminutemidnight.com if you want to help. And also the music is written, played and recorded by me, and you can download the music for free at our website as well if you wish. That's about it for today. We will be back with another show in a few days' time. God bless, have a great week, and we will see you then.